Modernization means, building out of reinforced concrete and glass, and basically traditional ways of making or constructing were somehow associated to more poverty, which is really sad because actually a lot of amazing inventions actually emerged from traditional architecture over centuries.
In this episode, I'm talking with Guillaume Othenin-Girard, ETH alumni and assistant professor of design at the Department of Architecture at the University of Hong Kong and co-founder of the Architecture Land Initiative. This is the We Are ETH podcast, and I'm Susan Kish, your host. Guillaume, good morning. How did you get to be in Hong Kong? Because you're in London now, you grew up in Switzerland.
Yes.
You studied in different places.
Yes. Well, I like geography.
I get that impression.
it's really serendipity in the sense that I was going with a friend to teach a masterclass in UTS in the University of Sydney. Mm-hmm. And I had to do a layover in Hong Kong, and I have a very dear friend, one of my best friends, teaching. And at the time, he was actually also an assistant professor at Hong Kong U, and he invited me to give a lecture on the work that I was currently pursuing at the time. And following the lecture, I spoke with the faculty members, and they actively and encouraged me to apply for a position there, which I did 6 months later. And it took quite some time, and in the end was settled during the protest. It was quite intense.
During the umbrella protest or parasol protest.
The umbrella was in 2014, but in 2019. So I arrived at the tail of the 2019 protest, and literally the first thing I heard while landing in Hong Kong was, "Please, people coming from Wuhan, wear a mask. There's a pneumonia." And I was like,
wow.
A pneumonia, I think it's okay. We're gonna handle it." Next thing I know,
gosh.
I was supposed to go meet a friend in Chengdu, and my student coming from Chengdu in Hong Kong told me, you better cancel your trip for the Chinese New Year. And next thing you know, the next day, all the borders were shut, and then COVID started. It's pretty intense. But originally, I was very interested in that geography, and because I was not so familiar with Southeast Asia, and Hong Kong was kind of this mythical place I was always quite attracted to.
What was Hong Kong like during the COVID? I assume you just were locked down. You just stayed there throughout.
Yeah. So they had the zero COVID policy, which was extremely strict. And it spanned for, I don't remember how long now, 2.5, 3 years. So within the city itself, we were somehow okay. I mean, the whole public realm, I would say, was very much controlled by the regulations of COVID, which happened at the end of the protest. So it was such a drastic shift where the streets were completely filled with students and people and protesters, and suddenly everything became somehow rather quiet. But then the whole problem was the fact that the city became an enclave, really, as opposed to this amazing platform, which I think that the airport of Hong Kong was the busiest prior COVID in the world, and then suddenly it became this enclave where nobody could really go in, and if you would get out and come back, you had to quarantine. At the beginning at home, and then in designated hotels, and they had also this COVID center. It was pretty intense.
It sounds extremely intense. And that's
a
how
life experience.
Yeah, I know. Although I have to say, I join many others in sort of having that as a blank spot in my memory, right? The times you'd have collapsed with that. How did you teach during that time?
Online at the beginning, and then in person quite quickly, because they had this zero COVID policy, which lasted for a year or so, or a year and a half. And ultimately, the zero COVID policy failed, and then everything, the whole virus came in. So then we were again online. And at the time, I mean, I actually ended up getting married with my wife.
Congratulations.
Otherwise, we would have
pretty
literally
romantic.
really been, yeah. We were 5 at the wedding, but it was actually very romantic. And I had to even send my wedding paper from the consulate via the diplomatic dispatch because there were no more post and no more planes. And so,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. So you went to the Swiss consulate and said, please, please, please?
Yeah, it was really funny. Actually, I ended up becoming a friend with them because I said, well, I'm going to get married. And said, okay, in 6 months, in a year. And said, no, in 3 weeks. And I'm flying to Athens because we had friends of family and the godmother of my father who is living on an island, and I've been going there since I'm a kid. And we decided to try our luck there. And in the end, it all worked out, but it was pretty stressful. And then we became parents a couple of years later during the Omicron wave, so we had to leave.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, it was pretty intense, but it's life. And
it is life. How did you find, what were the big differences in an area like design and architecture in teaching online and teaching in life? I find design is one of the, I have a whiteboard in my office and I draw on it a lot. I find it very difficult to replicate that on a screen.
I really felt for the student, because I loved my studies. And part of that, it's also a very collective endeavor because you're in the studio, You're surrounded by people, and you learn as much from your teammates or fellow students as from the teacher. So being removed from that was somehow, I think, quite impactful. At the same time, we were still able to connect with one another via Zoom, and then we had these Miro boards. So these digital whiteboards that we would use to project the work. And actually, I'm still using it now, even though we're all in person, because it's an interesting archiving tool. And space is a big issue in Hong Kong. So that was, as you may know, it's extremely dense, but it goes down to, the amount of space the student have at disposal or the amount of wall surfaces. So to have that digital doppelganger is actually very cool.
One of the projects I read about and looked at was this, as we would say in Boston, wicked cool thing that you guys did in Peru with your students, 45 students building it in 3 weeks. I'm sure I will mispronounce this, but the Pachacamac?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the name of the sanctuary, the pre-Columbian sanctuary.
So can you talk about how you got engaged in that project and what it was about?
I studied at ETH. I did my master at ETH, but I also taught at ETH a couple of years after graduation within the chair of Tom Emerson. And there I started to get in touch with a friend in Peru who is actually from Vallis, but has been living there for, I don't remember now, like maybe 15 years now, something like that.
So this is the Global Swiss Network.
Yeah, he's totally embedded within the Peruvian context. And basically, we started to kind of dream of doing something together. And he was aware that we were doing these so-called design-build structures within the campus of ETH with our students. And he was like, maybe there's something we could play there. And so I ended up going to Peru, and we visited a couple sites. And the idea was really to create a relationship or a knowledge exchange between La Católica, the university where he was in Peru, and ETH.
Before you go too much farther, what is when you say design build, you describe it almost like a defined term, but what does it actually mean?
Design build means it's a collective endeavor in the sense that a group of students are working in a given site with a given program, and they design, so they draw the project and they end up building it themselves as well. Basically, it's a very beautiful pedagogical exercise because it allows you to conceptualize your idea all the way to making it real and actually having people using it.
Got it. So you actually get to see and touch and feel what it is you had in your mind.
Exactly.
And what you were conceiving. Okay, good.
So
Thank
there's
you.
a direct link between your thoughts and the hands and the site, and then the people using your project afterwards.
Got it. So you were doing some of those projects on campus. You were talking to your colleague in Peru, and you decided maybe there's something there.
Exactly. And then we ended up meeting the head archaeologist of the Museum of Pachacamac, the Sanctuary of Pachacamac, which is one of the 3 most important sanctuary in Peru. It's still in use, actually. People come and pay tribute to Pachacamac. And I have to say, I was very impressed by Denise, the head archaeologist. She was really dealing with the community surrounding the site and was trying to bridge somehow the difficult condition in which people are living across the site and the archaeological site itself, which is endangered because there's this rapid urban growth and sprawls of the southern suburbs of Lima that basically eats little by little the archaeological site. So she was trying to devise program, activities, and work and remunerations for the local community so that they feel embedded within the cultural preservation strategy. And so we thought it would be great to actually use the opportunity of the design bill to help her in her endeavor.
So talk about the actual building, because it won the Dezeen Award that year.
Yeah. No, I have to say, from a personal perspective, it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever lived as an architect and as a teacher. I'm still in touch, actually, with most of the crew, and became this sort of family,
Right.
And I'm still working with some of them now, and it was a pivotal role also in terms of my own trajectory. We were basically 16 students from ETH and 24 from Peru, and the ETH students came twice. First, conducted this territorial survey to kind of understand a little bit what that landscape is about, the different tangibilities, the materialities, ways of making, and the inventions also that's here, that are maybe bricolaged in the highest sense of the term. We did that together with the Peruvian crew, so it was a way to bind the two groups of students together. And then we produced this collection of drawings and photographs that at the time we called an atlas. And from there, we identified together with the head archaeologist a specific site of action and a quite precise but simple program for the building itself. And then all the crew from Switzerland came back in June, in summer, and we spent 3 weeks. And again, we gave the brief to the students, and they conceptualized, designed, drew, and built it within 3 weeks. So the only requirement we had was the site.
Crazy.
Yeah, and to this day, I sometimes struggle understanding it.
I mean, that means you had all the materials there, right?
So we had a palette of material, which was already predefined, and we wanted to work with local material and agricultural textile that we could find in the market. But we also used wood, tropical wood, because that was actually tapping into the current research endeavor of my colleague at La Católica in Peru, which was somehow the idea of reinstalling a state of nobility to the material of wood within the context of the construction context in Peru, which used mainly concrete and corrugated sheets, metal, but mainly reinforced concrete.
Why do you use the term nobility of wood?
From what I recall, it was really this idea that modernization means, building out of reinforced concrete and glass, and basically traditional ways of making or constructing were somehow deemed associated to more poverty or non-noble.
In other words, if you built from wood, you were too poor to afford reinforced concrete or glass.
Exactly, which is really sad because actually a lot of amazing inventions actually emerge from traditional architecture over centuries, and that doesn't mean they're perfect, but there are a form of attunement with the ways of making and building your home or your dwelling and the context in which you're living.
How supportive was ETH of this project?
I think immensely supportive. I don't know that I could have done it in another institution, definitely not this time, because we had funding support. We applied for grants, of course, but we also conducted a financial campaign to gather sufficient amount of funding to do it. But ETH itself, with the quality of students, and somehow it was a very special team in the sense that I think there was this kind of unspoken trust that we all had with one another, the diligence that people have, and the commitment towards this common vision.
So ETH is well known for their architecture school. I live in Boston. Our most iconic bridge was done by an ETH architect.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it that makes ETH? I think of ETH and I think of exceptional research in chemistry or physics, right? What is it that makes ETH exceptional around architecture?
The tools that we have at disposal, the space that we have at disposal, but then there's of course the faculty and teachers, and the fact that most of the teachers that are teaching design have their own practice, and very often extremely successful practice. So there's always this direct link between the teaching and their research, together with the reality of having a practice and building in the world,
Just a few words. What is the project in Armenia?
So the project in Peru really was my first encounter with the archaeological world. And it took us by surprise. The project took us by surprise in that it got spread out and won these awards and somehow created quite an attention around it. And when I arrived in Hong Kong, I think at the time I didn't even finish my hiring process, but I met the archaeologist of the Hong Kong University who knew about my work, and he said, "Hey, I'm excavating a Bronze Age fortress in the Vedi River Valley in front of the Mount Ararat in Armenia, and I need a field laboratory, and would you want to collaborate?"
How cool!
Yeah, and it really, I was not even hired. It's also this serendipity moment, and so then I eventually got the gig in Hong Kong U, and then went to Armenia and visited him and visited the site and the beginning of his excavation campaign, and was quite struck by the place, and above all by the people and the complexity of the current contemporary situation in Armenia as well. So we started to develop an interpretive heritage strategy for the whole valley. So basically using the momentum brought by the archaeologists to question other forms of heritage that happens in the valley, because it's quite endangered from a climatic perspective, in the sense that by 2100 there will be 77% less water.
That's a problem.
And it's an agricultural land, it's an agricultural valley. So what does it mean to excavate the past and the deep past and the dead, essentially, while the living are also struggling to survive? So how do you mitigate this point? And in that sense, it's actually quite similar, even though the problematic are different. There's a similar core values in the Peru project. So That's how I ended up there. Yeah.
So Guillaume, one of the things that I read you had done recently is co-founding the Architectural Land Initiative, home of a really funky website. But more than the website, it's a really interesting program. What is the Architecture Land Initiative, and how does it sort of intersect with some of the other projects?
Well, actually, it intersects a lot. First, because the people that compose that cooperative are longtime friends. It's also cross-generational, because I had one of my former mentor and previous professor is now a friend, is part of it, but also colleagues with whom I started my first year of architecture, and then younger generations that I encountered either in Hong Kong or also in Switzerland. And I think we all have this common question of what does it mean to practice architecture today, and basically challenge maybe a little I wouldn't say like this is the corporation, but the way we make projects. And the word initiative is very important in our title, because that's really the idea, is that we come with particular, let's say, gaze or field of interest and start to unpack questions on the territory of the urban issue. That's what we're currently doing in Hong Kong, but then we also have commissions. We actually were commissioned, we have different commissions in Geneva, but also in Zurich, so it's also quite grounded in Switzerland, and we work with these cartographic tools or transscalar instruments that allow to situate particular spatial problematic or social problematic within the larger territorial realm or city realm.
All right, now you've got me lost. What is a cartographic tool?
We basically work with drawings quite substantially in order to situate and understand the given problematic that we analyze. Basically, they become the support of conversations with then stakeholders or municipalities or communities that are actually living or inhabiting this context. We identify the key issues or problematics, or also sometimes affordances or dormant affordances, and basically devise a series of actions that could take place in that particular territory.
Very, very cool. Did your years at ETH, did that experience, how did that prepare you for what you're doing right now and what you're doing at Hong Kong University?
I had two different ETH, right? Because I was a student, and I think I really value immensely my time as a teacher there, because it's almost like a second round of studying, you know. Mm-hmm. So I was very fortunate to have that, because I've learned skills and tools, and again, also how do you manage a team or how do you manage a group?
Very, very cool. Guillaume, thank you. That was a great, wide-ranging conversation. I've got about a dozen more questions, but I know our time is coming to a close. I'd like to ask you a few questions we ask all our guests at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were growing up, when you were a little boy, 8 or 9 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had, I think, two directions. The first one was pirate, and the second one was the knight. I wanted to be a knight.
A knight, as in Knight.
Yeah.
A chevalier.
A chevalier, voilà. I prefer the French term, actually. It involves the animal.
Very true. What are you curious about these days? What are you trying to learn about?
To pin down one thing is not easy.
So pin down a bunch.
I met a figure that became a very close friend. He's Mr. Wong. He's 86 years old, and he's a master painter. And he's been teaching me right now San Shui, the art form of landscape painting from a Chinese perspective, the mountain, the river. And so I learned a lot through his gaze and through his ways of understanding nature and landscape, and I'm quite fascinated by this.
Very cool. Well, you write around a lot about the role of drawing. That sounds to fit. And what books are you reading, or would you recommend?
Quite blown away by Lucas Berfus, Le Carton de mon Père. I read it in French. Sorry. I think it's the Vater, Mein Vater Kiste. In German. It really struck me. And on the side of the Chevalier, I'm actually reading Les Cavaliers from Joseph Kessel, which I'm very much enjoying. And also, I mean, The Carrier Bag, I also read, which was also something that is staying with me.
Any podcasts that you listen to actively?
Yeah. The Economist, actually, Drum Tower from The Economist. which I discovered during COVID.
I discovered a lot of podcasts in COVID. It's true.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I'm a complete, and I actually ended up meeting by chance a journalist, Armenian journalist working at The Economist, and I was like a little fan. The building is absolutely amazing. But yeah, I love their podcast.
Guillaume, again, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
I'm Susan Kish. I'm host of the ETH series, telling the story of alumni and friends of the ETH in Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. The ETH regularly ranks amongst the top universities in the world with cutting-edge research, science, and people. The people who were there, the people who are there, and, of course, the people who will be there. Please take a moment and subscribe to this podcast. Join us wherever you listen, and give us a good rating on Spotify or YouTube or Apple if you enjoyed today's conversation. I'd like to thank our producers at LA Media and ETH alumni, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us today.